Takes a long time. The odor of all prison food takes a long time to pass you by. Table with it from the shelf to shelf. Comic celebrity takes a back seat as the cigarette catches and sets off the smoke alarm.
Now, there was a time when everyone knew the earth was flat. I mean, there was no question or doubt about it. It was just common sense. There was the earth below and there was heaven above, and everything in between was strictly hierarchical. So you had women at the bottom of everything, and above them were serfs. And they had no rights or anything, and above them were knights, and above them were nobles, and above them was the church, and above everybody was the king. And above the king was God. And God had made it that way. And it was absolutely right for the king to be king. And he had to be obeyed because God said so. And that was that. And humans were naturally unequal because that was human nature. And everyone assumed that was the way things always had been and were always going to be forever and ever. But they were wrong, because they're not like that now, are they? I mean, does anyone think Prince Andrew has the divine right to be Prince Andrew and a divine right to be obeyed? Oh, I don't think so. And we don't believe humans are naturally unequal, and we don't believe God rules the world anymore. We believe markets do instead. And that's what we think. That's common sense, we think, and human nature, and there's no use arguing about it because that's just the way things are. The way things are now, and the way things always have been, and the way things always will be. Oh, but hang on a minute. Haven't we heard that somewhere before? And don't we also know that markets don't actually work anymore? And that capitalism has no answers to the huge crises we are all facing. Capitalism can't stop global heating because, well, it's too busy making money out of it. Capitalism can't stop world hunger or the hideous inequalities and injustice because, oh, it's too busy making money out of them. Capitalism can't stop the pandemic because it's too busy making money out of that too. Capitalism can't save the world. Capitalism can't even run a half-decent bus service. And it's never really worked for theatre. And that's because theatre fundamentally isn't about creating things to trade and sell. And also because it's really not about individualism. It's a collective enterprise whose major function is to give pleasure and promote empathy and understanding and a different way of looking and thinking about things. And that's why I think theatre should be about resistance. Resisting the cruelty and injustice of the present order of things and empowering audiences to imagine a different way of ordering the world. I think we should be trying to create post-capitalist theatre. So what are we doing here on the Fringe? Here, in the epicentre of theatrical capitalism. Because Fringe is a cutthroat marketplace and big business too. the Centre for Economics and Business Research, who sound terribly important, they estimate that if you take everything into account, when the Fringe is functioning the way it normally does, then it's worth £1 billion to the Scottish economy. Well, we artists don't generally see that kind of money, do we? It all goes to the venue landlords and the accommodation landlords and the hotel proprietors and the cafe owners and the restaurant owners and junk food manufacturers and people who sell alcohol and people who make alcohol, the taxi drivers and the people who make money out of car parks. And meanwhile, we artists are apparently quite content to work in crap conditions and make ourselves and each other ill with tummy bugs and alcohol and junk food and utter exhaustion and not be paid for any of it. In fact, most of us pay to do it out of our own money. I sold my house 7 years ago and I spent some of the money performing my Gospel According to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, way past my bedtime in a freezing cold church without proper lighting to tiny audiences. Oh, there were 3 in one night, I remember, and 1 walked out. Well, what was I thinking of? Well, I mean, it's true, the whole thing does function as a kind of trade fair in a ramshackle and completely random sort of way, and oh yeah, I did have a good time, and I did meet some amazing people, and I did get 2 or 3 trips to Brazil out of it, or maybe 4, or maybe other places too. But I mustn't get sentimental about the Fringe, because if I'm not careful, I'll get an idea for another show. And if I get an idea for another show, I'll want to put it on, even though I'm 71 years and it's time I grew up and knew better. But that's the trouble, isn't it? We can't stop ourselves having ideas. Once you've had an idea, you can't stop yourself wanting to put it on somewhere. But maybe that place is no longer the Edinburgh Fringe. Certainly not the normal Edinburgh Fringe. Not the Fringe of 2 years ago when it just kept on growing and growing and growing and was apparently worth £1 billion. The pandemic has caused so much tragedy and so much suffering and so much distress, but at least it has made us press the pause button on the Edinburgh Fringe and so many other far more important things besides. So let's just rush back to normal. Let's say thank you, Mr. Pandemic, and pause. Really pause. And try to imagine a different Fringe. One less cruel, less competitive, less unjust, less weighted in favour of those who have money and prestige already. Somewhere where we could actually create work in half-decent conditions. A different kind of Fringe. Let's see if we can imagine it. Let's see if we can create it. A Fringe that really does give everybody the chance to create new and different and amazing things that have never been seen or experienced before. A new vision for the Fringe. A new vision for the world. We need it. And we can do it. To quote from the Gospel according to Queen Jesus. We all have a light inside us. And sometimes it's the very thing we've been taught to be most ashamed of. And if you have a light, do you hide it in a closet? No. You bring it out into the open where everyone can see it and be glad it exists to shine in the world.